All right, hour number 2 here on a Monday on One Bills Live. Chris Brown, Matty Glad with you. Pleased to be joined now by our good friend Greg Cosell, senior producer from NFL Films, who's probably already diving into film study with great vim and vigor, I am sure.
Well, yes, I've had a productive summer, Brownie. I've probably watched in detail about 135 guys will be in next year's draft. And I've also watched a lot of NFL, various things. So,
you
no
are a
rest
goner.
for the weary, you know?
You are a goner.
Wow.
You are so around the bend. Oh, my gosh.
I know, I'm a little
I can't imagine. I would love to know what your eyeglass prescription is, because the fact that you don't have Coke bottles for glasses is amazing to me with all the film that you watch.
I only need my glasses to work. I don't need them to drive. So, I'm okay.
Yeah, you are a lucky fella, because mine would have glazed over a long time ago if I watched that much film.
Yeah, but the great thing about the off season, and then we'll get to the Bills, is I don't have a deadline every day, so it's fun.
Yeah.
During the season, every day is a deadline. Probably like a coach. Every day is a deadline. The off season is a little more relaxing. So if I feel like watching something a little more, I can do that. I guess one guy I'm interested to see, and I know he played a bit, is DeWayne Carter. Because, look, I think if you look at their defensive front, and let's start there since I mentioned Carter, at this point, we don't know what Von Miller is. Okay, so let's put him aside for the moment. He's obviously an older player, came off a major injury, only played about 250 snaps a year ago. Certainly did not look like the Von Miller who's a Hall of Famer. So we don't know where he is at this stage. So if you look at their defensive front, and I think it's probably fair to say that you don't look at that front and say, man, they got a big-time pass rusher in that group. So, I think that's something you're trying to get a feel for. That's why Carter is interesting to me. I think Smoot's an interesting guy because he's been in the league, and he's shown at times that he can rush the quarterback. So, that to me is something that you'd want to look at throughout the preseason. Again, I'm not there every day in camp, so I don't know what they're doing as far as rotations. But, I think in a Sean McDermott defense, and I know he's not the coordinator. I don't know, is he going to call it or is Babbage going to call it? I don't know that either. Maybe you guys do. Maybe
it's not been
talked
determined
about.
yet.
But I don't think they want to be heavy blitz.
Yeah, that has not been determined yet. I think Babbage is going to get like a trial run through the course of the preseason, and then a decision will be made after. And look, I think we're all expecting big things for Dalton Kincaid this year after a very productive rookie season. And, I think people, it's funny, we're taking calls, and people are bothered that Dawson Knox is on the field and Keon Coleman's the receiver that comes off when they jump into 12. At least that's what happened in the preseason opener. And I'm just like, look, everybody's just got to calm down here. And not to mention the fact that Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid are pretty different tight ends. Knox is more the inline guy, and Kincaid's outside.
Yeah, I think that's one interest. I actually went through every Joe Brady game this summer from last year because I was curious. Again, when I watch during the season, I can't watch 6, 7, 8 games in a row. So I did that, and just to try to get a feel. Again, just see certain things about the offense, see certain things about Josh Allen, because even really high level quarterbacks, and people always take this the wrong way, and then I'll get into something else, but people always think if you say a quarterback who's really good has to improve, you know what you get on social media. Oh, you're a hater. You don't like him. I guarantee that they're working with Josh Allen on certain things. I guarantee it. Just because he's a really good player doesn't mean the improvement stops or the attempt to improve stops. That never happens, particularly with good players. But one thing I'm very curious to see is what the balance is between playing 12 personnel with Knox and Kincaid on the field at the same time and playing 11 personnel. I'm really curious to see once the season starts against Arizona how they, and again, that could be week to week. It could be opponent specific, which it normally is, but obviously they're practicing certain things. So I'm very anxious to see how Joe Brady sees that.
Well, let's talk about the games that you watched that Joe Brady called plays for the final 7 games of the regular season. What are some nuggets that you saw within those games that you think the team has got to carry over into this season because it worked so well?
I think one thing you saw more of, we talked about motion last year. I think that's just become part of the league now with almost every team. I think you saw more play action from under center. And I don't know if that's a Brady thing. I don't know if Aaron Cromer has a say in that because he's a veteran O-line coach. But I think that that's something I particularly like. Okay, again, that's just my personal feeling watching tape for over 30 years. I like play action under center. I particularly like play action under center when it's outside zone because what that does, everybody automatically assumes that play action just impacts second level defenders, meaning linebackers. But if you go outside zone with your run look, what happens is the defensive line, their initial move is lateral, not vertical to the quarterback. So it slows down pass rush. All you need in the NFL is to slow it down for half a beat, and you slowed it down. That's something that I think Joe Brady is going to, be a little more part of what their offense looks like this year, because for the most part, we've seen Josh Allen in the gun. I think you might see him under center a little more.
We also kind of got a appetizer type taste of how Curtis Samuel is going to be utilized in this offense. It's going to be like a Swiss Army knife. The Bears were doing the same thing with Velus Jones for what it's worth. But Samuel ran that nice tunnel screen, got some yardage after the catch.
Yep.
How much can his skill set make the Bills more difficult to prepare for on a weekly basis?
Well, I think they have 2 Swiss Army knives, and I think that's going to make it interesting because I think Shakir is that guy as well. Now, last year, I watched all of Shakir's targets too because, you guys know I liked him coming out of Boise, and I thought obviously last year he started to become a factor later in the season. I mean, last year he was predominantly a slot receiver. 41 of his 46 targets came from an inside alignment, okay? And he actually had the second highest yards per target from the slot in the NFL. Only Brandon Ayuk had more yards per target. But Shakir can line up outside. For whatever it's worth, and it may not be worth anything, he did line up outside when he did play in the preseason game, and Samuel lined up in the slot. So both those guys, I think, have Swiss Army knife dimensions to their game, Brownie, and I think that is something also to look for when the season starts.
I want to ask you about a defensive position group that has quite a bit of competition in it this season. I'm talking about the cornerbacks because you've got Kaiir Elam out there who is now healthy after he was on the injured reserve last season with a foot injury and then was inactive for the rest of the season. Once he was healthy, he's ready to go and has been making plays in training camp, has had the most interceptions out of the cornerbacks and most big plays during practices out of the cornerbacks. But then you have Rasul Douglas, who had the several interceptions when he came to Buffalo, just picking up the playbook what he could. He was an impactful player out there. And then you also have Christian Benford, who is just Mr. Consistent when he is playing games. How do you look at that group as 3? It's a good problem to have. You have 3 viable options. Sean McDermott is calling this a clean slate for Kaiir Elam. When we look at the 3 of these guys, it's hard to predict what's actually going to happen come week 1 and how that battle is going to shake out because you do have guys who have different strengths too and can play to them depending on who you're playing.
Yeah, and Elam has been kind of a surprised disappointment for me, and obviously for the Bills as well, because I really liked his college tape, and I thought he had all the necessary traits physically, don't know the kid, all the necessary traits physically to be a quality outside corner in this league. Maybe this is the time that happens. I don't know the answer to that. But certainly Douglas came in and he's been around the league and he's a certain kind of corner. He's one of those guys that, and I hate to say this cliche, but it seems true with him that he seems to have a good feel for the ball. And Bedford, he's a late round pick out of Villanova. He's been pretty solid, pretty consistent. So we'll see how that plays out. But Elam, if you're just looking at physical athletic traits, he would have the the highest level in that area. So I'm really anxious to see if he can play to those traits and become the starter. Because if he can play to those traits, you're going to have to put him on the field.
Right. Some day 3 draft picks showed up on occasion in this game on Saturday. Ray Davis showed up actually in the passing game out of the backfield, broke some tackles as well. And then Javon Solomon, the pass rusher out of Troy, he's just really put together, Greg. Like, you stand next to this guy, he's thick everywhere. Even though he's got long arms and 11-inch hands, he has flashed as well. I'm just very curious where Solomon fits in a loaded defensive end room. I think we know Davis is going to be on this team. It was interesting to see him get some third down work and some blitz pickup, and then factor as a receiver out of the backfield.
Yeah, I really liked Ray Davis coming out of Kentucky. He'd been with 3 schools. I really liked his tape at Kentucky. He's a different back than James Cook. So, you could see both getting, Cook's obviously the number 1 back, but you could definitely see Davis. He's physical, he's bigger, he's low to the ground, he's a hard runner, but yet he's got some juice to him. He could be one of those guys that he just keeps working, and you feel you got to get him on the field, situationally. I mean, obviously he's not going to get 15 carries a game, but he could be one of those situational backs. Javon Solomon was a fascinating watch coming out of Troy. He does not quite have the length you want, but he's got long arms. I mean, length in terms of height, but he's got long arms. He was one of my favorite players to watch. He's played with such high level intensity and competitiveness. I imagine he does that in training camp when he gets opportunities. I said he'd find a place in the NFL despite not possessing some of the critical factors many teams might look for. But he's got, as you said, Brownie, long arms. I like him. I mean, if you can rush the quarterback, okay, there's a place for you in this league. Now, and they are definitely going to be looking for someone who can win one-on-one from the outside. And if he can do that as he continues through camp and the preseason, if we get to week 1 against the Cardinals and he's shown that he can rush the quarterback and win one-on-one matchups, and it's not a matter of sacks, it's a matter of impacting the quarterback, then there'll be a place for him. Yeah,
and just really quick, so me and my broadcast partner, Eric Wood, were talking about him during the game, and Eric, who is a Louisville alum, said, I'm going to give you a comp, so I'm curious what you think of this. He went Elvis Doomerville as a comp for Solomon, shorter build, but effective with bend off the edge and strength, and Doomerville's a Louisville guy, so maybe Eric's a little biased, but I thought it was an interesting comp for Solomon.
I think it is. I think Doomerville might weigh a little bit more, but, maybe 10, 15 pounds heavier than Solomon. But there's no question when I watch Solomon at Troy, and that's a good comparison. He's a sudden twitchy edge rusher from wide alignments. He's got first step explosiveness. He showed the ability to bend, that motorcycle lean. He's got body flexibility. He could flatten his rush path. I mean, everything about him. And again, then you'll get caught up in, well, he didn't play in a Power 5 conference and all that. But you know what? You look at traits and attributes, and if he can do that at the NFL level, then he's going to be on the field situationally for the Bills. Yeah.
The last time we talked to you was during our draft shows that we had. You know what this team looks like now after the draft and picking some guys up via rookie tryouts. Now that you've seen this roster a little bit in that first preseason game, you know the guys on the team right now. Do you believe the Bills have what they need to go out there and get better this season, hopefully better than what they did last season?
I mean, I don't think there's many questions on offense. Obviously, the left guard position is David Edwards now, who was their 6th O-lineman last year. They played a lot of 6 O-line. I imagine they'll find someone who can fill that role because he'll be the starting left guard. But other than that, I mean, people will look at the receiver position, obviously, because it's different. But I think offensively, you probably feel pretty good. I think you'd probably like to see a little more, I hate this word, but it fits consistency offensively. They had moments where they looked unbelievably good, and then other games where it just seemed like it took too long to get started. I don't know it's hard for me not being there to know the reason for that. But I think defensively, you do have a few questions. We talked about the pass rush, the secondary. I think it's still a bit of a question. They're going to have two new safeties. That's always a question. If they were to start the season tomorrow, guys, who would be the starting safeties?
It's probably Taylor Rapp, and I think Mike Edwards was the plan, but he hasn't been healthy.
Same as Cole Bishop.
So it's probably DeMar Hamlin.
So Edwards and Bishop have not been healthy, right?
No,
Nope.
They've missed much of camp and still aren't back yet.
And Edwards has missed the entire offseason. He wasn't even
He had a shoulder injury
practicing
in the
for
spring.
OTAs.
That's right. Because didn't he get hurt in the playoffs last year?
Yeah. I don't know if that was connected to the injury he had in the spring. Perhaps it was, but I'm not sure.
Hurt.
So, yeah.
I remember. I think he got hurt in the Bills game in the playoffs. Yeah.
Yes, he did. I think that was a concussion, though.
Oh, okay. But anyway, so look, in an ideal world, they want either Edwards or Bishop to be the starter opposite Taylor Rapp. And by the way, Taylor Rapp, and again, nothing against him, but he's a question as well because he's never really been that guy. So the secondary is, I don't want to say it's a concern because I hate to use that word at this time. We don't know the answer to these questions yet, but it's a work in progress. We just don't know.
Yeah. Fair enough, Greg. We'll catch up with you here, and obviously we'll get you every week during the season, so we look forward to that. That's going to be here before we know it. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks.